Well, welcome. I'm Cassie Bergstrom,
And I'm Kevin Pugh.
and this is our next vlog on learned helplessness for our motivation and education course, as well as anyone else who's watching it. And so we're going to talk today about learned helplessness and different things that can result in learned helplessness, as well as things that we can do to help counter learned helplessness, particularly in students in school. So I figured I'd start off with a couple stories.
Actually,
Um,
first, you
yes.
need to lean
Oh,
to the side so they can
yes.
see. Once again, you
Check
can
out
try to guess where we are. We'll let you know at the end.
where am
Oh.
I? Yes. Two different places. Good call. Thank you for
All
reminding
right.
me.
What's your story, Cassie?
All right, so I've got a couple of stories. So as I was thinking about a way to illustrate learned helplessness, when I was growing up, and I still really enjoy the stories of Winnie the Pooh. So the Milne stories, and you have Pooh and Piglet and Tigger, and you always have Eeyore who looks generally fairly down. And there's one clip of one of his, a story in one of the books where Eeyore was trying to build his house. And so he'd build his house, and it took him a long time because he's a donkey, doesn't have hands. And so he'd build his house, and then the wind would blow it down. And then he'd build his house again, and the wind would blow it down again. And so he got to the point where he was like, I'm done. I'm not going to build my house again. And so Pooh and Piglet went to visit Eeyore, and they saw him next to, basically this pile of sticks, and they were like, well, what's going on? And he said, oh, my house blew down again. And so they helped him put it back together. Um, and then there really isn't a great resolution. They moved on to a different story. But I think we could see, explain his, when he got to the end and he had tried to build his house, the wind blew it down, and he tried again, and then the wind blew it down. He basically was in a situation of learned helplessness. He knew no matter if he tried to build his house again, something was going to happen and he wasn't going to have his house. So that is one of my stories that was illustrating learned helplessness. As I was brainstorming and kind of reading through some things, and I'm teaching a culture and psychology class right now, and I had a group discussion last week that kind of went in the direction of looking at stereotypes in Disney movies with princesses. And they were talking about this damsel in distress narrative. And I
Mm-hmm.
started thinking about it, and I was like, this really relates to learned helplessness also. This idea that you have this, usually young woman who is in, either like asleep from a poison apple or in a tower or something like that, but very much set up to where she needs to be rescued. And we could talk gender stereotypes here as well, but in terms of looking at it from a learned helplessness perspective, it might be that they tried to get out of these situations. Rapunzel might have tried to get out of the tower, but had no luck. And so you sit there and wait. Wait as the damsel in distress for someone to come along and to help you, which is typically, when we look at learned helplessness, even in classrooms, it's often not something that the kiddo themselves can get out of. It's often kind of this perpetuated feeling of no matter what I do, I'm going to fail. So those were my two stories, one a little more connected, but kind of some
So
illustration there.
yeah, so I have a research study that goes with your stories.
Yes.
So you probably know this. Um, so this was way back in the 70s, and it was a research experiment involving dogs. And they
Mhm.
brought these dogs in, um, and they put them in a cage, and there was like two sides of the cage, and there was like a
Mhm.
little barrier in between the two sides that the dogs could jump over.
Mhm.
And then they had it set up that they could send an electric current through the bottom of the cage through like one half at a time, so they
Mhm.
could essentially shock the dogs. So these poor dogs would be sitting in there, and then a little light would come on, and then after the light come on, then the floor get the shock, the dogs would jump around, beep, 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 and eventually learn to jump over the barrier and get to the other side. And pretty quickly they learned that you could avoid the shock by, as soon as the light came on, jump to the other side, be safe. So those are the lucky dogs. The unlucky dogs, they got put in there, but instead of a barrier they could jump over, they just put in a solid wall. So the light would come on, the shock would come on, the dogs would get shocked, and they'd jump around, but there was nothing they could do. They would just get shocked. And so, after a number of trials of this, then the light would come on and the dogs would just lay down and whimper. uh, and then, okay, here's the interesting part. So then they
Yes.
go in and they take out the barrier. So now, well, the full barrier. So now it's just a half barrier the dogs can jump over. So dogs are in there, light comes on. Guess what the dogs do?
Uh, I know this. I have the spoiler, so I can't. I should guess.
They just lay there, right? So yeah,
Yeah, but you might guess that they would jump over because there was an option.
no, yeah,
No.
they just lay down and whimper because they've learned to be helpless.
Mhm.
They've learned that nothing they can do, or so they think, can escape the shock. Um, and so, that goes along with your Eeyore stories and
Yeah.
these Disney princesses being taught to be helpless. Um, and so, research study with the dogs, it also helped give insight into, where this learned helplessness comes from. And it seems to be, it's like when you're put in these uncontrollable situations.
Mhm.
Um, and this doesn't just happen with dogs, but it happens with our students. So they get put in a situation where they experience successive failure, and either it is uncontrollable failure. So they're put in a situation where they just don't have control. And so they experience, failure a number of times and conclude that there's nothing they can do. They're just going to fail.
Mhm.
Or things happen in an environment to convince them that they don't have control. And it's their perception. Um, and so maybe could you talk about that a little bit, like how these social messages can lead us to think that we don't have control and so on?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a lot of messages, and I think that we probably don't intend to send them a lot of times. We don't mean to send these messages, but sometimes things that we do or say, or even just messages from society at large, can build up this a number of things. But one is negative stereotypes. We start having negative feelings. Maybe we listen. Well, it's pervasive throughout society, but we have negative stereotypes about, for example, women in math. And there's the stereotype that women are better at, or so that's my own changing of the stereotype. The stereotype is that men are better at math than women. Or we have stereotypes related to socioeconomic status, and that there's certain things that kids of certain socioeconomic statuses are better at, stereotypes related to ethnicity and race, these types of things. But essentially we get these stereotypes from a lot of places, but they impact how we feel about our own success or failure, or the likelihood of our own success or failure. um, so essentially you might have that I've heard the stereotype about women in math. I'm in a math classroom, I don't do very well, maybe on a test, and then someone says, well, it's all right, you tried, you're probably not a math person. And so then that feeds into it, because I've absorbed that this actually happened to me in 7th grade. I absorbed some of those stereotypes about gender and math. And I remember not doing well on one exam, and my teacher was like, well, she's probably not a math person. That really bothered me. So I actually the next year tried out for math counts and made it to state.
Good for
And took
you.
algebra. So I also had very supportive social structure at home, I should say. My family was very much like, no, don't listen to him.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have that, my perception was that I failed at this task. It goes along with the messaging I've heard about women in math. And so I must just not be good. And so, why should I take algebra in 8th grade? I might as well, go the easier route. But and it's not, even on the face, maybe the math teacher didn't mean to say that, but that's my perception. That was my perception, and that's the messaging I took then. So yeah, these social messages can kind of convey lack of control. Like it's outside of your control if if you feel like you're confirming a stereotype that's held about a group to which you belong. And so that can result in learned helplessness also.
Yeah. And and the research confirms this, that there's been a number of studies when they look if stereotypes like that one, girls are worse at math,
Yeah.
are present in the classroom, then then you can go and often girls and boys will experience the same amount of struggles in the math, but the
Mhm.
girls will be more likely to attribute it to lack of ability and
Yeah.
and then adopt more of a learned helplessness. Well, I just don't have a math mind and things like that.
Yep.
And same with other things, like these stereotypes, across all these areas, there's harmful. Um, but sometimes, most of us we're fairly aware of, well, no, some of us are aware. We should be aware of these stereotypes and know that these things are harmful and that they're not true and that. But there's other kinds of messaging we sometimes unintentionally do as teachers, right?
Yeah. So the messaging, and it might be things we do though, and it might be things that we mean to be, a beneficial thing, but when we say things like, well, at least you tried, then it kind of makes you start feeling like, well, what does that mean? I tried, but
You
I
mean
still
I can't
failed.
do it?
I
Yeah,
can't do it. Yeah, that must mean
yeah.
something. They must be saying this because it means something about me as a person.
Or
Yeah.
sometimes, like I've read some research where, like with low achievers, we're more likely to either like ask them easier questions or let them off the hook quickly, whereas students we perceive is not low achiever, we treat them differently, and so it sends these unintentional messages of, you're not capable, you
Yeah. And
can't
even
answer this question, you can't
there's
do this
been
challenging thing.
some interesting research on that same lines in terms of the follow-up questions we ask. So it tends to be that we tend to ask, in science classrooms at least, we tend to ask boys more follow-up questions than girls.
Right.
And so it might be that they you might have a boy and a girl in class who both answer the question right, but it might be that we're more likely to ask the boys a follow-up question. Well, why does that happen? Or something that's really digging into a deeper conceptual understanding, than with girls in classes. So yeah, there's a fair amount of research out there that's supporting these slight differences. We tend to call on more boys in class than girls, and so they're having different opportunities to have that kind of affirmation of their own knowledge as well.
Yeah. So, all right. So learned helplessness, it seems to arise out of, experiences of repeated failure, repeated struggle. Um, but especially when struggles are paired with, there's some sort of messaging, where it leads us to, to believe that we're like these dogs and don't have control over the situation. Um, and so, digging deeper into this issue, um, there's a whole theory called attribution theory that focuses on the kinds of attributions we make, for our success or failure. And it turns out that these attributions, or the causes that we give for our success or failure, play a big role in whether we develop more of a learned helpless kind of pattern and orientation, um, either in a specific subject or like, in education in general, or um, more of uh, a sense of high self-efficacy, a belief that you can be successful no matter what. Um, and so there are three of these attribution dimensions that we um, refer to. So one is internal versus external. So is the cause for my success or failure, is it something internal to me, or is it something external caused by the environment somehow? And then the second one, is it controllable or uncontrollable? So do I have control over this success or failure, or was it something beyond my control? And then the third one is stable and unstable. So, is this cause something that is stable, that it's going to stay there, for a long time, maybe forever, or is it unstable, meaning like next time, could be totally different result. So those are some of these dimensions. Um, do you want to explain how those, feed into learned helplessness or not?
Yeah, so when we're looking at a situation of learned helplessness, we've definitely got apologies for that, it's upstairs. We've definitely got an internal element in that it's the student is defining their failure as something that was internal to them, so that it was something that they see as a quality of themselves, like I'm not good at math, for example. Additionally, there's that uncontrollable element. So it feels like it's not something that I can control. It's outside of my control. I'm not good at this and I can't do anything to change it. And I think typically fairly stable in terms of the dimension, in that, if it felt less stable, it would be easier to kind of get over, not have that continue into subsequent experiences. But we feel like it's something that, if I lack ability, it's like, well, that's something that's inside of me. I can't control it. I can't increase my ability or decrease my ability. And it's pretty stable. If I'm not good at math this year, I'm probably not going to be good at math next year. And so, that kind of builds up that mindset of, why should I try then?
So it's me. There's nothing I can do about it, and it's never going to change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why
Yeah.
not just give up? So.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the attributions, and it's possible to bleed over into not just like the subject that you're failing at, but then feeling like that can really affect all sorts of domains,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
in a negative way.
So, and it's probably worth pointing out that there's positive attribution patterns too.
Yeah.
Um, and so and it's not exactly opposite, but like when we fail,
Hmm.
instead of attributing it to something like lack of ability, what is really productive is to attribute things that are internal
Hmm.
but controllable, and the more unstable, ones I could
Less
think.
stable.
So
Yeah.
things like my effort, the strategies I use, um, also, things like knowledge and skill development, those are more stable. They take more time, but they're
Hmm.
still controllable. But so if I, you know, struggle in something, do bad on my English test, um, or paper, um, and I focus on, well, I didn't do well, but I think if I, found better strategies for writing a paper and I put more effort into it, I started earlier, I could do better. That's a much more productive pattern than being like, well, I'm just not a writer.
Right.
I like that.
I'm not going to do that again. Yeah, definitely.
So, um, all right. So you have a student who has learned helplessness.
Yes.
What can you do about it?
What can you do? So, but there are some specific things that we can do. And particularly after events of failure, I think this is a really potent time for helping students kind of process failure and process failure, as you were mentioning, Kevin, in a positive way, to see it as something that, that I can control, and I can learn skills and strategies to help me overcome. This also relates, even as we were talking about that, just definitely relates to the growth mindset messages. So growth mindset is this idea that our ability is not fixed, that ability can change over time. We can get better at things. Um, and this isn't something that all students have. Some students might come from different cultures, or have heard different messages that, like, you're not a math person, or you're that your IQ is never going to change, or these types of things,
You're
that,
creative or you're not. You're
or you're creative
musical
or
or
you're
you're
not.
not.
Yeah.
You're logical or you're not. And I mean, these are pervasive. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that we hold up that idea that you're either that or you're not thinking that, it's a wide spectrum of ability that can fall in between being
Yeah.
like logical and not. Um, so it's very different. So growth mindset is really trying to encourage students to see, to have attributions that are internal but controllable. So, seeing and unstable, honest, to some extent, unstable, which is an interesting way to look at it,
Yeah.
but recognizing that, my ability might be here now or here. I want it to be here, but there's things that I can actually do to grow in that area
Yeah.
and to change things going forward.
Yeah.
Um,
You
yeah,
aren't just, born with a math mind or not, but it's something that you develop. uh you aren't just born athletic or not, but you
right.
develop skills in different areas. And yeah.
Yeah, and so having that, sending that messaging to students can be really helpful, especially if they're not hearing that in other domains of their life. That can be a really beneficial thing to send these general growth mindset messages. You're not there yet. And actually, Carol Dweck, who did a lot of
Mhm.
work in growth mindset, her TED Talk, which is the most like her most popular TED Talk, is the power of yet.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
this idea that you're not there yet, but that that's not an unattainable goal.
Yeah.
So that's one way we can do that.
So really closely related to that is this idea. So sometimes we talk about this strategy of attribution retraining.
Mhm.
Um, and what it means is specifically working with students to change their attribution patterns. So you pay attention to what they say when they struggle. Well, even when they succeed, but especially when they struggle. um, and what kinds of attributions do they make? And when they make ones that are problematic, so any sort of uncontrollable ones, so especially like these ones we've been talking about where I attribute my failure to lack of ability, but also they might say have other ones where like they just focus on external uncontrollable things. I didn't have enough time, the instructions weren't clear, and um
The teacher wrote a bad test.
yeah, my mom didn't help me enough. Um, and we always focus on trying to retrain those attributions to ones that are these more internal controllable ones. So, um, no, uh, you didn't, get a low grade on this um, paper because you're not a good writer. It's because we need to work together to figure out the right writing strategies. You can be successful. I know you can. We just got to find the right strategies and then make sure that you get started early enough so you can put in sufficient effort in order to be able to be successful on that. And it takes time
Mhm.
um, that you have to work with the, especially if it's, if a student has a real, like deep case of learned helplessness, then like even when they succeed, then they'll just say, well, that was only because I got lucky. Well,
Yeah.
it was only because you helped me.
Mhm.
It was just a really easy task. Anyone would have succeeded. And so you're going to have to work on retraining. Like no, not everyone would have said you actually worked on this. I saw you put forth effort. That's why you succeeded.
Mhm.
And when they still struggle, we focus in again on those internal controllable things, their efforts, their strategy, and accumulating knowledge and skill over time. And it can be a really long process, but it works. I mean,
Mhm.
um, changing those attribution patterns changes, their whole learned helplessness behavior.
Yeah, and it's usually something you need to do at an individual level because that
Yes.
specificity is
Yes.
crucial when we're looking at attribution retraining. You can't just say, "Oh, you use these strategies." It's like, no, you outlined before you wrote. That has, that had this outcome. Yeah,
That's a
but it
really
can
good
take.
point. Yeah.
Yeah,
So like the growth mindset messaging, that so a lot of that can be done at a general level.
yeah,
We help understand growth mindset and the value. But the attribution retraining, really does have to be done at this individual level. So,
yeah. For it to be
um,
successful, I think.
yes,
I
yeah.
guess you could try it and not, but yeah, individually and specific tends to be really helpful.
Mhm.
Another thing we can do that can be done at a more general level also is to counter negative stereotypes. So to recognize and even just say things like, I boys and girls have both equally done well at math in my classes in the past. Things like that, even that personalize it, tend to help students break down those negative stereotypes or and even like have them recognize that those negative stereotypes are there, because sometimes we absorb these things without even really realizing that we do. And so directly counteracting those negative stereotypes can be really helpful. So with messaging and with, giving examples even of, even when if I was teaching a stats class, talking about my own experience with with someone telling me that, oh, maybe you're just not good at math. Kind of weaving those stories in as a way to counter negative stereotypes can be really beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Another thing we can do is to use praise effectively. So
Mhm.
when they, like all praise is good, right? Well, not exactly. Some praise is better than the other. When it comes to these learned helplessness issues, um, then uh, well, is when we praise ability, we can sometimes unintentionally create more of these fixed mindsets that then lead to learned helplessness. So it might be, like the student succeeds and I say, "You are so smart," or "Wow, you are such a uh, naturally gifted drawer," and things like that. Um, and it kind of conveys that it's due to some innate ability, which is more fixed. Um, but then what happens is when some struggle comes along, like it always does, then they're likely to again focus on that fixed thing. If their drawing doesn't turn out so well, like, oh well, maybe I'm not such a good artist after all. um, or struggle on that test, oh maybe I'm not smart. And so instead, it's better to focus praise on like effort, and particularly effort towards authentic achievements. Like, oh, I really like the effort that you put into working on this project, and I can see that you have really put thought into this. um, and I appreciate seeing that. So so less ability focus praised and more on the process and the effort, which again you can see how this aligns with these attribution patterns.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that praise, again, the specificity, I think you could talk about it here as well, because if you're just saying, oh, you didn't write so well, then that's not really giving me anything or any
Yep.
information to change that. But even with praise, it's like, oh, just good job on that. That's not giving me any information either.
Right.
But yeah, I think that element of focusing on effort and focusing on, oh, you did this and this was the outcome. Um, that's really good, as opposed to just saying things like, oh, you're so smart, because that's just
Mm.
opening up a can of worms. So if I don't do well, does that mean I'm not smart? Problematic.
Yep. Yep.
Totally.
Mm.
And what you mentioned about, authentic activities and having that authentic success is a really crucial thing that we can do also. And so one thing we can do is try to set up these mastery experiences for students. So set up experiences that are challenging, are going to provide an opportunity for genuine success. So, success on a challenging task that you've achieved through effort is one way that we can really start to build. And then, the messaging that we send that you really worked hard on this, this was the outcome, helps students be able to connect the dots more in terms of their effort and the work that they're doing, and then the outcome that they see. And yeah, you gotta, have it so that the student owns it. So it's not just like something that they felt like, oh, this is the teacher just set me up for success, because that's going to again go to an uncontrollable attribution that we're going to receive from that. It has to be, something that really kind of captivates and something that the student can master, so they feel genuine success from that in an authentic way, instead of feeling like it was just kind of something that was contrived or set up. Because kids are really smart and they don't really want pandering. They don't want to be just told, oh, you're so good. That's not really going to help in terms of the attributions they make. And it's particularly if that might be a kiddo that's already showing signs of learned helplessness, then they're, not, that's not going to be helpful.
Yes. Yes. So I mean, you can look at it as learned helplessness comes from experiences of failure.
Yes.
Sense of competence comes from experiences of success.
Mhm.
And students have to have those experiences if they're really going to overcome that learned helplessness and develop these, a sense of competence and confidence in some area. So those success experiences, those mastery experiences are so critical, as well as this other messaging stuff that we've talked about. So, all right, so that's our vlog on dealing with learned helplessness and
Yep.
replacing it with a sense of confidence and competence, self-efficacy, as we sometimes refer to it.
Yep.
So, all right, where are you, Kat? I think I know where you are.
Do you want to guess? I
Is
know you've
that,
been there.
are you in Lake Agnes?
I am.
I
I'm
knew
in
it.
Lake Agnes, and that's Mount Richtofen. No, actually, Mount Richtofen is over here. I have to look and see it from the side. I am in Lake Agnes, which is in the very northwest corner of Rocky Mountain National Park. So
Yes. It kind of
hiked
has
up there.
that distinctive big rock slide on the one side.
Yeah,
Yep.
totally does. And I think I'm looking over the island, but there's a little island it's a
Yep.
beautiful lake.
Yep.
Really gorgeous. But yes, you're right. I'm in Lake Agnes. Where are you?
Any guesses?
Again, I got the spoilers.
Oh,
I learned earlier.
okay.
But it's a much more tropical climate than the pictures that I have.
Yeah, I decided to go to Hawaii today.
Very nice.
It's kind of cold out, and so yeah. So I'm on the Big Island at the top of Waipio Valley here.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
It's extremely green.
I know. So green.
Very wet.
Yeah.
Unlike lots of Colorado right now.
Yes. Kind of
Unfortunately. That drought's no
So,
good. But yes.
all righty. Then that is it for today. So we'll be back in the future with another vlog.
Yes. Thanks for watching.
All right. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye.